Hi guys, welcome back to my channel, or should I say welcome back to the desk corner. The desk corner is my happy place. Today's video is a realistic graphite eye tutorial. This is very long overdue on my channel. I've never posted a realistic graphite eye tutorial before, so I don't know why. I don't know why it took me this long to do it. So before I start, a couple things I want to mention. The first thing is the materials I'm using. So I'm using the Faber Castell 9000 graphite set, which I have made a review video on. I'll link that above in case you're interested in seeing that. But anyways, I'm also using the Strathmore mixed media sketch paper, I believe. And so it's a little bit thicker than a normal sketch paper would be. And one last thing before we get started, I just want to mention, in case it's helpful to anybody, that this actually took me 2 hours to do all the shading. I just sped it up for the sake of the tutorial, but it really did take me 2 whole hours if you're wondering how long this drawing took in real time. So the intro has been long enough. Let's go ahead and get started with the tutorial now. Before you start shading, you want to make sure that your sketch is nice and polished and you have included enough details. Now this part is a little bit tricky, and the hardest part for me is the pupil and the iris. If you have trouble with the pupil and the iris, you could trace something circular so you get a perfectly round shape. We're going to be using graphite pencils for this. I do have that Kimberly 9XXB pencil, which is slightly darker than an 8B, that I like to use in my graphite work as well. Anyway, we're gonna go ahead and get started with the shading now. I like to start with the iris, and this is honestly like the central point of the eye, so I'm coming back to this a lot throughout this video. And how I like to start is using either like a 3B or 4B pencil, even a 2B, to sort of start shading gently some of the midtones and then some of the shadows. Notice I'm not pressing very hard though, being really gentle, because I am going to use a Q-tip to go ahead and blend this out after. And I'm avoiding the highlight as well as the pupil right now because I don't want to mix up my sketch at all. I just want to focus on shading in the iris. Once I'm done with this layer, I go in with a Q-tip and smooth it out. When you work on the pupil, make sure that you're using your darkest pencil. So I'm using my darkest pencil, and I'm going to add quite a few layers to get a really dark result. This will be the darkest point of my drawing, and I need to use it as a point of reference to see how dark everything else needs to get, so I like to fill in the pupil pretty early on. Now that I've filled in my pupil, it makes the iris look super light, so I can use that point of reference, and I can use a softer grade pencil like 6B, 7B, 8B to fill in some of those shadows on the iris. When I'm done with this, I'll go in with a Q-tip and be careful not to smear the pupil on accident. I explained earlier, guys, how the iris is kind of the central point. This is the area you're going to be looking at, and this is the part that kind of needs the most effort and attention when you're shading your drawing, even though the other details are going to make it come together in the end as well. But the iris, you have to make sure that the iris looks nice and soft and almost like reflective and kind of more like a wet texture. You don't want it to look too flat or too hard or have any harsh lines. So there's going to be a lot of blending with Q-tips or tissues or whatever you like to use to blend. That's very important. And right now I'm adding in some contrast as well because I want to make sure that there's depth in the iris, and you can see compared to the pupil now, the iris doesn't look as light as it did in that first layer. Now, by no means am I done with the iris area at all, but I do jump around a little bit. I like to see how my drawing looks cohesively, so I apologize if that's a little bit distracting, but I am going to go ahead and start working a little bit on the inner corner of the eye as well as the white of the eye. Some of those details are really fun for me to do. You'll notice in your reference photo, which should be pretty detailed if you're doing an eye study, there's a lot going on in the inner corner of the eye. And the white of the eye actually does have some shading. It's not completely white, but you want to make sure that your shading is very light and that you smooth it out very well with whatever you're using to blend, because it kind of just needs to have a very soft and reflective look the same way that the iris does, and that's very important as well. Now the inner crease of the eye, it has more little detail shading and shadows and things like that, which I'm going in and adding those right now. And it also has some areas that are soft and need to be blended out with the Q-tip, so I'm going to do that. And I'm getting this overall very nice, smooth look because of my blending. So that's why I think it's important to use some kind of tool to blend. And if you have a blending stump, sometimes you can create like smudges and things like that. So I do recommend for larger, smooth areas like this, like the white of the eye or the iris, that you use something more like a tissue or a Q-tip, and a blending stump might be good for a smaller, more detailed area. I apologize, by the way, if I'm talking too fast. I'm just trying to jam-pack as much information into this video as possible, so I apologize for that. Hopefully I'm still making sense. I do want to mention it's important not to overlook the waterline, which is underneath the eye, because the eyelashes need to come out from the lash line under the waterline and not like straight from the eye, directly from the eye, obviously. So you want to make sure you don't forget about that part. And the waterline itself has a bit of shading. There's some darker areas, some lighter areas. So I'm not going to go and just do that super fast. I'm going to put in effort for every little section to make sure it all comes together in the end. I felt that it still looked a little bit flat, so I started to add a bit more shadow to the white of the eye. I wanted there to be more depth. Yeah, I wanted there to be more depth. And I think that that's important to go in and add more and more as you build up your drawing, and try to build up your contrast as much as you can. As well as the waterline, the upper lash lines and creases above the eyelid and things like that, those are important as well. You need to make sure you fill most of that in before you do your eyelashes, because the eyelashes are just going to go over that, and it's going to be hard to work that area once you put in your eyelashes. So I'm working on this area, building up the skin. The skin texture is a little bit rougher at this part, so I'm not going to smooth it out nearly as much. But I think that those creases are really important to add in, and some of those creases can be really, really dark and intense. And I noticed that the top of the iris had a bit of a dark, intense area that I just added in as well. And then, of course, once I did that, I realized I needed more contrast and darker areas in the inner crease of the eye. It's kind of just like a cycle going back and forth and adding contrast in different areas until you feel like your drawing is complete. Okay, so this part's a bit fun. I'm going in and adding in some details to the iris. There are some little details and little like line looking things that come out the iris. No, not come out of the iris, but that come from the pupil and kind of go out to the outer corners of the iris, if that makes sense. I just want to be careful not to be too harsh with anything. And then I did have a little bit of an issue with a highlight that's supposed to show up on the right side of the eye, and I will go in later on and fix that because that ended up being a little bit of a mess, and I decided I didn't like it. Just wanted to go in and fill it in and make sure it wasn't a super bright highlight. But anyways, so I'm working on some of the details of the iris. Some of them are like little round things, as you can see, and then others are little lines coming out. I just think it's really fun when you're in the kind of end stages of your drawing and you get to work on those little details like that. But I'm just trying to be careful not to accidentally create anything that looks too unrealistic or harsh. Now, another fun detail are those blood vessels on the white of the eye. And for these, you want to make them kind of curvy and not super stiff. And also, some of those areas are going to be darker than others. So I'm using an H and an HB pencil for these areas, I believe, and making sure there's some variation. They don't all look just like hard lines. I did add a bit of shading to the highlight on the iris. And then I'm going to go in and start working on those upper lash line areas, upper eyelid areas, everything that's over there, still adding in more shadows. That's actually kind of a very shadowed area in the end result, so it's going to take a bit of building up because it's one of those areas that's going to get quite dark, and those creases can get really, really dark because of the shadow, how it's like a very fine detail and there's a really harsh shadow there. So don't be afraid to go quite dark with this area. I feel that it's appropriate and necessary. Same as everything else, I'm just doing layers and then going in and smoothing it out and then doing more layers. And if it's not smooth enough, I kind of erase it and try to do it again and make sure that it gets as smooth as possible because I don't want it to be kind of harsh or smudgy or anything like that. So you might see me going in and doing that. And there is some skin underneath the waterline, super light like area here that I'm going to kind of add in. The method I'm using for that skin is actually cross-hatching, which to me, cross-hatching is super fun. So you'll see me kind of darken that area a bit later. And then from here, I'm just adding a little bit more detail and smoothing out some more areas. I want to make sure that those lines around the iris, so the outer circle, is not very harsh and that it kind of blends into the white of the eye a little bit as well. The inner corner of the eye looked a bit incomplete to me, so now I'm going in to add more shadow to that, and then I'll use my eraser to pick up some highlights and make it look a little bit more shiny, because there's some areas of that part that look quite shiny. I like to use that eraser to pick up some details, but again, I don't like that highlight I did on the right side of the eye, so yes, I'm gonna go back again and fix that later. I also use the eraser to do some detailing on the skin above and pull up some highlights, and then I'm gonna go and start the bottom lashes. And this is a sped up video, so you could see I'm actually taking a long time with each eyelash. You don't want to speed through the eyelashes because it's very specific. You want to make sure they look like natural hair that kind of clumps together a little bit, so you could see some of them are in clumps. You have to be very careful with the direction that they're going in, which changes as you move across the eye. And also some of them are going to be darker than others, so I will use a darker pencil to do that as well. It's kind of just a very time-consuming process, but it's also fun to do the eyelashes. I'm using my darkest pencil to do the top lashes, which I'm even more careful with. You could see I'm taking a long time. The direction is very specific, so the direction towards the inner corner of the eye is more downward, then it goes more up, and then it goes towards the left on the left part, and the eyelashes get very long. They're more like clumpy at that area, so I'm very careful with that. And it honestly did take me a while, and once I'm done doing that, I can go in and darken up the crease behind the eyelashes still. I can do a little bit of shading, but as I said, most of my skin shading had to be done before the eyelashes because it's hard to work on that once you're done with the eyelashes. And I love the eyelashes. I think this part is just so much fun, and I love creating the shapes and clumping them together and everything. I think it really makes things come together. So I would practice doing eyelashes. You want to kind of flick your pencil, not do a straight harsh line, or it's not going to look like a natural hair. I did a bit more skin detailing on the bottom with the cross hatching, so just a little bit of dark area near the corner of the eye, the inner crease, and there's also a bit of a highlight right around the inner crease before there is a shadow, if that makes sense. There are some reflections of eyelash on the highlight of the eye, which I made sure to add in. That's an important detail. And then if you're doing the eyebrow, which you don't have to do with an eye study, but I like to do it, it's the same technique of flicking the pencil to get the hair-like formation. So I sketched in my eyebrow so I knew where the shapes were going to go beforehand. But I used my tissue to shade a little bit after I created the line so that it looks a little bit more natural. And then there's also a little bit of detailing under the eye, like a couple of lines underneath that I added in, and at this point I'm just checking all my details, making sure that I have everything in that I need to have. Now remember how I said I hated that highlight, so later on another day I went in to fix it. So I went in to fix it. I just wanted to make it more smooth and natural looking, and I didn't really want there to be a big highlight there. So that's what I was doing in this little clip, and then just kind of went in and made sure that all the other areas had enough detail. I noticed that there was a lash reflection in the iris on the right side as well that I didn't notice before, and a little bit of detail on the pupil that I didn't notice before either. So that's what I'm doing, is just finishing up the eye and adding some more details. And that's all I have for you guys today. I do want to show you guys something. So I have an eye study that I did a few years ago, and I just want to show you how long it really takes to make progress with these things and how long it took me to really get to this point. So I'm going to insert a clip of the old eye study from a few years ago compared to the one I did today for you in this video. I hope that today's tutorial was helpful for some of you, and I hope that you at least learned something from it or could take something from it. I tried to really go over as many points as I could. If you have any tutorial requests for me, let me know in the comments what tutorial video you want to see from me next. Thank you guys so much for watching. Don't forget to like this video if you enjoyed it, and I will see you guys in the next video. Bye guys!